Anger and disappointment over the election of Donald Trump are being channeled into widespread rallies. One day after he was inaugurated the 45th President of the United States, protests are taking place across the country and around the world. Today we'll look at the future of organising under the new administration in this special edition of The Stream. I'm Femi.
I'm Malika, Bilal on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., where the Women's March is underway. Hundreds of thousands of people are marching across the city. We've been speaking to activists all day, and they've been telling us why they're protesting. Here's a few voices.
It's time for people to realize that everyone's important, everyone matters.
I'm marching for all of my LGBTQIA+ friends, and just to make sure that they know that our voices will never stop being heard.
We live in a globalized world. We need to be more accepting.
It's past due time that women enjoy equal rights as same as men.
Joining me on set, we have Valerie Irvin, Senior Advisor for the Working Families Party. Matthew Hurt is a libertarian activist and writer. And coming to us on Skype, we have Megan Ming Francis, and she's Assistant Professor in the Department of Political Science, the University of Washington. Guests in the studio, you have been out in DC. You have felt that atmosphere. What are we seeing right now? How would you describe it? Matthew, you go first.
Well, I think what we're seeing is a small d democratic reaction to frustration across the nation. Coming from the other side, coming from a conservative or libertarian viewpoint, and someone who is an activist, I applaud the thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of folks who are amassed in cities across the country and across the world. And what I want to see them do is perhaps take legislative action and get more involved in the process.
Valerie, what are you seeing? What did you see?
It was extraordinary. I got on a bus early this morning from Maryland and came over with a bus full of women, and as soon as we got off the bus, we knew we were engaged in something pretty different and pretty special. And we came to march to resist the Trump administration's sort of thumb down on women and people of color and immigrants and the LGBTQ community. And we were here just saying, you know what, we're going to organize a massive resistance, and this is day one.
So yes, I'm just looking here. This is the Women's March of Washington, their website. Number of marches, these are sister marches. These are other marches going on around the world. 673, more than 2 million estimated marches. Before I go to you, Megan, and bring you in, I want to show you some of the other marches around the world that we picked up from our community. So this is a video of marches around the world. Have a look on our map.
And I am marching for love and for compassion and the reclamation of women's power.
What do we want? Equal rights. What do we want? Now.
Megan, people often claim this is global. I mean, this really is global. How would you characterize this? You look at movements, you look at marches, you look at campaigns. How would you characterize what's happening right now?
I think it's incredibly exciting what's going on right now, especially in terms of how kind of diverse and also spread it is in terms of other countries. I mean, the symbol that at some level it's sending, right, is that what is happening in the United States is not isolated in terms of this country, that its impact and effect is spread everywhere. And that's kind of really exciting to see that it's not just being spread from one city in the United States to other cities in the United States, but it's being spread on a complete global level.
Looking at pictures at the bottom of our screen of Washington, D.C., Matthew, what kind of activism is this? Can you actually pinpoint what it is that's happening today and how you would categorize it as a kind of activism?
Well, I think the first step we see in achieving political goals is an anger or frustration, some emotional reaction that drives people to throw their hands up and say, what do I do next? And so what we see today in Washington and across the country and across the globe are people taking that first step. Michael Moore, one of the speakers today, American filmmaker, said you have to take a number of steps. You have to call your elected representatives. You have to run for office. And those were very practical, doable things that the people who are taking part in the marches today can do once they leave the march, once they go back to their homes.
Yeah. Valerie?
I just was thinking what an extraordinary act of solidarity today has been across the world. and across the U.S. And I think what women are saying is something much larger than I think we thought in the beginning. I think what women are saying is we're through with this patriarchy. We're through with white men telling us how we can take care of our own bodies or whether or not we can bear children. And so I think it's a much bigger movement than we ever thought in the beginning. And I also, I can piggyback on what you said a little while ago about participation in the political process. I think that's part of what we're seeing here, but I think the other part of it is women are saying no more. I saw today grandmothers and moms with babies and strollers. I saw men and women and all different hues. I think what we're witnessing is that the Donald Trump phenomenon has actually stirred the stick that woke up the angry beast. And I think that this is just the beginning.
To that point, I hope that the attendees at the women's marches today will take a moment to congratulate Kellyanne Conway, who is the most successful campaign manager, the first female campaign manager to manage a winning presidential campaign, a successful business owner, and a mother of four, someone who balances both family life and professional life in a way that has propelled her to one of the most respected positions in our political discourse today.
Now, Matthew, to be fair, for our international audience, Kellyanne Conway is a very divisive figure, and not everybody likes her, particularly if you're not a supporter of Donald Trump. Let me show you something from the Women's March Instagram. Now you've upset grandma. Euphemism there. Okay. Together we rise. Two strong women, may we know them, may we raise them, may we be them. What is the connection between what is happening here on the street and what you mentioned about the campaign manager for Donald Trump? Why did you bring her into the conversation? Why was that important for you?
I think that the views of women or of any group are not homogenous. I think that in a two-parent household, women make 81% of healthcare decisions. They make 82% of economic decisions. And so when you talk about what women's issues are, it's the economy, it's taxes, it's gas taxes, it's getting, finding those opportunities by releasing or eliminating barriers to entry. Things like occupational licensure, which impact primarily women and minority and low-income individuals, people who, to a second step, people coming out of the criminal justice system to go and find economic opportunities in the future. So what I want to do and what I teach people to do and what I encourage people to do is eliminate those barriers to entry that encourage people to go out and create what they want to be, what they want to be when they grow up, the American dream or whatever their dream is.
But I think...
go ahead, Megan.
If I can just jump in real quick. But I think the problem with a lot of women kind of embracing the idea of Kellyanne Conway as some figure of feminism is that she was the campaign manager and ran a candidate that was in so many ways kind of steps back for the women's movement in terms of, in terms of what is necessary for women to succeed in society these days is equal pay, is reproductive freedom,
so
is
Megan,
the idea.
Megan, you bring up good points because this march has actually brought together a lot of different political sides, and I want to actually go back to where the originating of this march comes from, which is Washington, D.C., and then just pick up on what Malika is finding down there on the ground. Malika?
Yeah, exactly, Femi, and that point that was just raised is that there are many issues here. And the people here, of course, are not just women. They're coming from all stations of life. We actually spoke to one man who was here protesting. He's a disability rights activist. He's disabled himself, a person with disabilities. And he told us the issue that he is out here for today cuts across all different issues. Have a listen to what he told us.
We think that disability rights is a key component of this particular march, because disability rights are about health care, gaining access to supports, government services, but also about disabled people's ability to be productive and participate and contribute in the society itself.
I want to talk tactics here about where you go from where Malika is right now, from many of the marches around the world, to what do you do next? Tactics, Valerie.
Yeah, so I'm an organizer, and my organization is engaged very deeply in tactics, not just tactics, but strategy moving forward. And one of the things that I do every single day when I get up in the morning is I work in 12 states that the WFP, the Working Families Party, operates in. And we have something called the Pipeline Project, and we are going out and finding progressives who want to run for office, and then we train them, and then we help them get elected. And it's been highly successful. In New York City, for example, the WFP has its own separate ballot line in the city, and we've elected the majority of the New York City Council and have now a progressive council which has passed amazing progressive legislation in New York City, and we're doing that here in Washington, D.C., in Maryland, and in many other states that we're working in across the country. We believe that you can't you can't move the needle in trying to change legislation without having the people who live this fight each and every day making those kinds of decisions, and that's the work that I'm engaged in.
All right, let me show you something here. This is the ACLU, and they are saying on day one, legal action on day one. And the ACLU is the American Civil Liberties Union. What do you make of that, Megan? The idea that an event like the inauguration of President Donald Trump, that makes people say, we are going to resist on day one. Can you put that into some kind of historical context for us?
Yeah, I'd love to. So my first book focuses on the NAACP, which is a National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. It's the longest standing civil rights organization in the United States right now. But I focus on their campaign against racial violence in the first quarter of the 20th century. And from the period of 1909 to 1925, the end of Reconstruction, kind of where white supremacy was law, and the NAACP was trying to figure out how do we create a movement to protect Black lives. And what they did is they turned inward, they built up community resources, number one. Number two, what they did is they tried to engage the larger public into kind of a much larger conversation and reframe the movement's demands into the language of cherished American ideals, such as democracy and freedom. And then what they did, and this is, I think, where it connects with the ACLU, is that they pushed on government institutions, so the legislative branch, the judicial branch, as well as the executive branch. It's no surprise that the ACLU is like, day one, we're going to be in the courts, because that is, especially for rights organizations, civil rights in particular, that's where a lot of inroads have been made. But it's unclear in this Trump era if the judicial branch will really kind of bear out huge inroads.
Let me just show people here. This is what Matthew was doing last night. He was at an inaugural ball, looking very dapper. It's just in case you haven't realised what side of the aisle Matthew is from. And then you're actually warning about, being careful as you navigate your way around, because the States right now is very split.
Certainly.
In terms of politics. And then here, I mentioned the ACLU, the rep says that sometimes the good guys are on the other side of the aisle. Hey, I'm one of them.
There was a...
How do you talk? How do you talk to one side of the aisle and the other side?
Absolutely. Pew Research released a study last August that said 47% of American voters did not know someone who was voting for the other candidate. So if you're a Hillary voter, you didn't know a Trump voter, and vice versa. And I think that's dangerous for our political discourse. And this is why I love opportunities like this to come and talk to people who have diverse viewpoints. It's why I was at the Women's March today, and it's why I'll be at the Women's March next week, the March for Life, the 44th annual March for Life, where hundreds of thousands of women will again convene on the National Mall to talk about issues, because I want to get a full view of the struggles of everyone, to understand what everyone is going through, to create, again, that American dream, that greater well-being for themselves, for their families, and for their posterity.
Valerie, the very first day that President Trump was working, he actually signed some paperwork which meant that for mortgages, for people who were struggling with their mortgages, it meant that they would have a lot less money for their mortgages. They would have to pay more. That was within the first few moments of him becoming president. How problematic is that for, I suppose, Americans? Just keep an eye on what's happening with their lawmakers.
I think Donald Trump is very confused about who his base is, because even with the ACA, the Obamacare, it is going to really hurt the people who got him into office more than many other people. And when you start talking about making it harder for people to pay their mortgages, the people that are struggling the most, those are people directly in Donald Trump's base. I think he's going to start to feel and hear more and more from people who he purports to be helping when they find out. It's going to take a little time for people to actually find out how Donald Trump's pen, how he just starts to sign things into existence, is going to really destroy a lot of working class families.
Trying to work out what's going on in Matthew's head right now. I'm failing. Matthew, just tell us.
No, it's fantastic. The discussion is great. I think what we're going to see, and what I want to see in, say, the realm of healthcare reform, is an approach called the frontier rather than the fortress. Currently, the healthcare system is dependent or is primarily concerned with making sure someone has a card, someone has a health insurance card. But health insurance isn't health care. So creating quality care, how do we do that? How do we create greater well-being for those who are underserved, for those who can't afford health insurance for themselves or for their families, and for those people who may be terminally ill who want to try new medications?
Sure. All right. Behind me is some of the poster art from the Women's March, the Women's Marches around the world. I'm actually going to head back to our main wall over here just to check in with Malika, Bilal, somewhere in Washington, D.C. called the Ellipse, to see what's going on there. Malika, in the middle of the march.
Exactly. The Ellipse is where people are now gathering. It's really on the steps of Trump's new home. The White House is behind me. You can see it there. So some parts of this might look like an empty field, but really we're surrounded by thousands of people, men, women, and children, who are gathering here, really bringing it to the steps of Trump's new home. I want to go to a point earlier that Matthew raised about reaching across the aisle, because people here do think that's important. We actually, a little bit earlier, went to the Trump International Hotel, and we spoke to a Trump supporter. She talked about what she thinks of these protesters. Have a listen.
If he doesn't do well, then, when we just move on, just give him a chance. They gave Obama a chance, or the prior president. I didn't like Bush, but there was nothing I could do. So give him a chance. He'll do good. He'll do good for everybody. I think where the lies and the accusations were all misinterpreted, honestly. He does not talk about immigrants. I'm an immigrant, but I am a legal immigrant. Just give him a chance, and everybody will live in peace.
So I want to go back to Megan. Megan, if you look at this historically in terms of the US being split and then movements popping up, what happens in terms of that ability to affect change when there's such a split in US society? Is there historical precedent for this?
I think in terms of when there's a big, kind of big partisan split, especially when we have a new president, that it creates a lot and I think exciting opportunities for movements on the ground to actually kind of move the institutions of government. At the end of the day, we live in a wonderful country in which kind of the government and institutions kind of derive their legitimacy from people on the ground. I think when things are a bit more divided like this, that political actors, elite political actors and institutions pay attention to people on the ground, especially when they're mobilized. You see this kind of happening around, one of the kind of another divisive president would be Woodrow Wilson, and then Nixon, and then especially with the Gore v. Bush that happened. And you see people taking to the streets, demanding to be heard. And at some level, you see government responding to them.
Yeah, I think that's been historically the case all over the world, is when people start to organize and mobilize in their own home areas, in their home districts and cities and towns. It's really not, I think we're learning that at the federal government level, that's not where the action is. The action's going to be on the ground. Like you saw today, people coming from cities and towns from all over the country who are ready to join a movement. And I think people are really tired of not being heard. We heard this from the Trump folks the whole time during the election campaign, that nobody was listening to them. Well, the same is true for the hundreds of thousands of people on the ground today in D.C. I heard this all over the place, that people are tired of being ignored, that their voices are not being heard.
I agree with Valerie wholeheartedly with most of that, in the sense that it does take
we heard the most of that.
That it does take boots on the ground. Morton Blackwell, longtime conservative activist here in the United States, founder of the Leadership Institute, says in politics nothing moves unless pushed. And so, the party in power.
Is this a push? Is what we're seeing a push?
Yeah, absolutely.
Matthew,
So,
let me show you something here. If you look down these columns here, these are all different marches around the world. There's over 600 sister marches around the world. So this potentially could be a push. We're also asking people, not just here in our online community, but Malika's down on the ground, about the impact. What's the possible impact that all of this could have? Malika.
Oh, it's interesting you asked that, Femi. That's a question that a lot of journalists actually want to know the answer to. We spoke to people. There's enthusiasm, without a doubt. Asked about impact, though, the answers are a little bit looser. There's a little bit of a lack of clarity, admittedly, on the part of some protesters. One person said they want people to go out and join their local government officials. Another person said he personally is going to get off of Facebook and stop Facebook activism and actually go into his local community and speak to people. So that's one way, but it's unclear what happens on Sunday.
Let me just show you a word cloud. We've been talking to our online community and asking them, what impact do you want this march, this day, to have? These are some of the words that they actually shared with us. And on this word cloud, you can pick out, how are they thinking? What are they thinking of? Minimal, people snap out of apathy, war against men, tolerance, boycotts, awareness, change. You get a sense of what the world is thinking post the inauguration. It's only just been a few hours since the inauguration. Megan, if we're actually thinking about what can actually happen now, what can actually happen now?
Right now, in terms of change, there's a lot of protest. I mean, in terms of the historical example that jumps to mind the most right now is when we move in terms of the Nixon presidency and the anti-war protest around the Vietnam War. And people were upset, and they wanted answers, and they wanted the war to end. And they took to the streets, and they demanded the war end, and they demanded that troops come home, and that government kind of retreat. And we see government, even if they didn't want to initially, responding to the activism that was taking place. Also, I mean, one of the things in terms of a practical level is that we can run for office, we can get involved, we can write our member of Congress.
Let me just show you here. There's so many different issues that have been wound up in the marches. One of them is for a call for participation for disability march. So that is about disability rights, women's rights, human rights. Matthew's to-do list is very different from Valerie's to-do list. It's very different from Megan's to-do list. Does this make a movement?
I think it does make a movement. I mean, one of the things we have that we didn't have during the Vietnam War era is social media. And I think that it was amazing how fast this march actually got put together. It happened very, very quickly.
It was one grandmother's idea, and then she put it on Facebook, and the next day, pow.
Right, and so that's how people got here. And I think these disparate movements are trying to find a way to congeal around a few items that everybody can agree upon, I think.
Well, Guess, I have to say that you're all on social media, so we can pick up this conversation and continue to have this conversation with you, and we're looking forward to doing that. I am going to just check in very quickly with Malika Bilal. Malika, what's happening down on the ground there?
The connection's cutting up. The connection's cutting up a little bit here, Femi, but you can see there are people still streaming into this field right in front of out. The kitty cat hats are here.
Okay.
To follow what's happening.
Malika Bilal, reporting live for the Women's March on Washington. Continue to follow that march using hashtag Women's March. Thank you very much for being part of this program. Take care.
Our election was a huge siren call and a wake-up call, really, that we really haven't achieved equality in the way that women really should have it.
The majority of voters did not choose this person.
To reject hate, racism, division in the world.
I believe everyone deserves equal access to health.
Because I care about democracy, I care about safety, I care about domestic violence.
These policy commitments undermine and threaten the human rights of not only women, but also the human rights of migrants, of refugees, and of LGBTIs.
So it's time for us to come together and fight for what we believe in.